You feel it before you name it, the clean tear in the fabric where your reflex to watch yourself watching finally gives way, and the loop you've rehearsed since childhood begins to unspool like a ribbon burning in slow motion. A hush enters the room. Your awareness pulls back from the mirrors that have been facing mirrors, an infinite hallway of reaction and rehearsal, and returns to the one vantage that was never captive, the still center from which perception emanates. In that stillness, a geometry wakes, angles align, ratios breathe. The field around you stops behaving like a crowd and starts behaving like a choir. You don't move, yet vectors shift. Old scripts, once magnetic, lose charge. The names you gave your limits, history, temperament, fate, fall silent, as if a backstage intercom has ordered every understudy to stand down. Your nervous system, long tuned to the frequency of survival, hears a subtler instruction: coherence. An invisible metronome begins to click beneath your sternum. It does not demand speed, it demands accuracy. You meet it with breath, and the breath meets you back, measuring your honesty in cycles of expansion and release. Notice the moment the loop cracks. The thought that would have triggered the emotion that would have triggered the reaction does not complete its circuit. It sparks, finds no conductor, and dies with a harmless flash. In its place comes a clean interval, a bright interval, a doorway precisely the size of a choice. The architecture of the quantum is simple here. What you stabilize within, stabilizes without. The field is not impressed by your performance. It is calibrated to your reference. You are choosing a reference now, not the past, not the prediction, but the living coordinate of what you actually are. You are not escaping reality. You are re-signing the contract of what constitutes real. The clause that once bound you to repetition dissolves under a solvent older than language. Direct presence, feel how the room responds. Edges soften, time loosens its belt. Possibilities that once orbited out of reach step inside your gravitational permission. The observer does not vanish, your loop does. What remains is the unlooped witness, the lucid seamstress, threading attention through phenomena without snagging on the fabric. Your true frequency does not shout, it clarifies. It is the tone you produce when self-judgment is dismissed as unreliable evidence. It is the timbre that emerges when you cease negotiating with versions of yourself that learn to exist as reactions to louder rooms. Hear it, a low, clean hum beneath thought, a carrier wave capable of holding futures without straining. The body recognizes this pitch. Fascia unwinds, jaw unlocks. Microtremors deliver stored winters back to the earth. Outside, the choreography adjusts. People who match your previous bandwidth drift politely to the edges. Synchronicities, long queued, request entry codes, and are granted them. The world isn't changing to flatter you, it is reconfiguring to maintain the conservation of coherence. Systems prefer symmetry, the field prefers truth. You become simpler, and complexity organizes around you as service, rather than siege. You are not being chosen by destiny, you are choosing the vector destiny uses to find you. Breathe once more, hold the interval. Feel the geometry assemble around your stillness like a cathedral, rising from invisible blueprints, stone by silent stone. What trained the loop wasn't malice. It was momentum, billions of micro-measurements your nervous system made to reduce uncertainty into something survivable, then into something predictable, then into something you called me. Prediction is a kindness until it becomes a cage. Your brain, a precision Bayesian engine, kept minimizing error by comparing incoming sensation to the library of what had already happened, firing the same circuits, summoning the same chemistries, rehearsing the same outcomes until probability felt like prophecy. This is how a timeline impersonates a destiny. This is how a rehearsal becomes a life. The loop spoke through three instruments: attention, affect, and action. Attention narrowed to confirm what it expected, like a searchlight sweeping only the familiar coastlines, while the archipelago of the new remained unlit beyond the beam. Affect, your felt sense colored raw data with legacy meanings, tinting the present with the palette of unprocessed winters. Action followed suit, efficient and automatic, the body executing ancestral codes long after the environment changed. You called this who you are. The loop called it low energy cost. The field called it unstable coherence, the hum of a system holding itself together by habit rather than truth. Here is the simple physics underneath the poetry. Measurement collapses possibility. The moment you observe your experience through an identity pre-selected by the past, you force the wave function of your life into an eigenstate compatible with that identity. You didn't do it once. You did it continuously, an unconscious metronome striking the same chord so frequently that other harmonics could not ring. The quantum was generous. Superpositions offered themselves. Subtle bifurcations appeared in the seams of ordinary hours, yet the loop, hungry for certainty, accepted the same solution set every time. Probability hardened into pattern. Pattern hardened into premise. Premise told you who you must be. You feel the residue of this in your body. The jaw that anticipates the sentence before you hear it. The shoulders that round as if to shelter a younger version who still believes thunder is punishment. The gut that interprets novelty as risk and translates risk into speed. None of these sensations are errors. They are messages. The loop is not an enemy to be killed. It is a momentum to be re-entrained. What you sever with force returns by force. What you retune stays. Retuning begins where loops get fed, in the way attention binds to signal. You were taught to hold attention like a fist. You now learn to hold it like a lens, soft, wide, precise. This softening is not laziness, it is a higher resolution pass. When you widen, the reticular activating system does not switch off, it recalibrates thresholds. Relevance is updated. The brain's predictive models, once trained on scarcity and defense, are presented with new priors: safety in stillness, abundance in coherence, meaning in accuracy rather than in drama. Hebbian assemblies, those fire together, wire together, knots begin to unwind as freshly synchronized firing patterns whisper a different rhythm through cortex and limbic and spine. You can feel the physics of this shift in the language of music. Phase locking replaces friction. Entrainment replaces argument. The mind, once a room of competing drummers, starts to follow a single, unhurried tempo coming from deeper than thought. The heart, an electromagnetic lighthouse, broadcasts that tempo through fascia into space, and space answers, not as superstition but as resonance. Systems entrain to dominant rhythms. When your inner metronome stabilizes, external circumstances reorganize to maintain the new beat. Clients call, doors open. Patterns that required your constant micromanagement fall away, not because you shouted them down, but because they cannot phase match the frequency you now refuse to abandon. This is not magic, it is conservation. Energy moves along paths of least impedance. Self-judgment is high impedance, presence is low. When you stop spending watts on narratives that fail to predict reality, you recover voltage for creation. The field notices. Complexity that once arrived as noise is now decoded as signal, and signal density increases until coincidence loses its camouflage and stands revealed as choreography. The loop had other tricks. It confused intensity with importance. It confused familiarity with truth. It confused speed with safety. You correct each confusion gracefully. Intensity is just amplitude, importance is alignment, familiarity is just repetition, truth is coherence. Speed is just accumulated panic, safety is accuracy in slow motion. You are not slowing for fear, you are decelerating to re-enter the slipstream where friction is minimal and direction is clean, and you begin to practice a subtler measurement, witnessing without collapse. You allow sensations to register fully without packaging them into identity. You watch thoughts vaporize without recruiting the old committee to vote on their meaning. You feel emotion finish its half-life without adding narrative accelerants. This is measurement without violence. This is observation without verdict. This is how superposition is preserved long enough for a higher solution to present itself without you forcing the old one out of panic. You haven't left the world. You've left the loop that mistook survival for self. The field doesn't require you to earn entry. It requires you to stop falsifying your signature. The moment you do, a thing both ordinary and holy occurs. Reality, relieved, reconfigures around a reference that can finally bear its own name. You feel the first recalibration as a subtle rearrangement of priorities inside your chest, not a grand epiphany but a quiet correction of aim, like a telescope turning a fraction of a degree and suddenly revealing a galaxy that was always there. You are not adding anything to yourself, you are removing distortions. The instrument is already exquisite. It is the tuning that wavered. So you begin with the simplest instrumented truth. Rhythm. You hold the breath, the way a conductor holds silence before the downbeat, not to delay the music, but to give it a reference. In through the nose for a count that feels like 4 but tastes like 5, out through the mouth for a count that feels like 6 but lands like 8. The numbers are less important than the honesty, longer out than in, because release is the doorway through which the nervous system steps back into safety. Vagal tone rises. Heart rate variability blooms. The heart becomes a generous oscillator and the brain entrains to its civility. This is not spirituality performing science. This is physiology consenting to coherence. Then attention widens, not to drift, but to gather. You adopt panoramic awareness. The full width of the room, the corners you usually ignore, the weight of your heels, the space above your crown. Peripheral vision cues parasympathetic permission. Noise stops masquerading as threat. Novelty re-enters as information instead of emergency. The reticular activating system receives new criteria. Show me what corroborates coherence. It obeys. You start noticing exits from patterns at the exact moment you once would have doubled down. You catch yourself mid-sentence and choose a cleaner word. You recognize a familiar bait and let it pass, feeling the old hook leave your lip without tearing. Emotion is next. You retire the habit of interrogating your feelings for evidence and practice something older than language, allowing them to complete their chemistry. A wave arrives, heat in the throat, tingling in the forearms, a pressure behind the eyes, and you give it clean passage for 90 seconds without narrating it into a life sentence. Cortical stories stand down. Limbic weather clears. The body learns that it can storm without flooding the archive. Your timeline, relieved of vintage interpretations, stops time traveling you into rooms that no longer exist. You begin to design with symbols, not as superstition, but as interface. The psyche speaks in images, the field speaks in patterns. You offer a geometry the way a musician offers, a chord, triangle of breath, square of posture, spiral of attention, triangle for honesty. What you sense, what you feel, what you choose. Square for stability, feet, pelvis, rib cage, skull aligned like cardinal points. Spiral for emergence. Attention circling a center that does not move. The body understands these shapes. Fascia reweaves along vectors that waste less force. Gait changes. Voicey deepens. You do not force confidence. You conserve it. Language receives its audit. You notice which syllables squander voltage should, always, never, impossible, and replace them with phrases that measure reality rather than accusing it. I'm noticing, I'm choosing, I'm willing. Each statement is a small lens that removes chromatic aberration from the scene. Precision returns. You are not optimistic, you are accurate. The field rewards accuracy with options. Then you step into the praxis of selection. The loop collapsed because you refuse to overmeasure. Now you select by stabilizing signal. You choose one virtue as a carrier wave for the week. Clarity, courage, kindness, candor, and you embed it in micro-behaviors that cannot be faked. Clarity, respond after breathing once. Courage, make the call before noon. Kindness, soften your gaze before you speak. Candor, name the simple fact without embroidery. These are not affirmations, they are oscillators. Repetition converts them into standing waves that change the interference pattern of your day. Coincidence blooms again, not as lottery, but as lawful resonance. Your environment begins to serve. Light is adjusted warmer at night, cooler in the morning, to instruct circadian clocks, not to quarrel with your mission. Sound is curated one frequency at a time until your space hums at a level the nervous system recognizes as home. Clutter is removed, not for aesthetics, but to drop impedance. Every object becomes a member of your orchestra or it retires. You feel rude at first, then you feel resourced. Complexity reorganizes around a simpler core. Relationships reorganize too. You stop entraining to rooms that demand your dysregulation for belonging. You grant others the dignity of their tempo while refusing to counterfeit yours. Some narratives end, some deepen. All of them clarify. You are not withdrawing love. You are withdrawing distortion. You learn to bless without binding, to witness without extracting, to speak without rehearsing the applause. Mirror neurons stabilize around an ethic. Do no harm to your own coherence. And work this old altar where you burned hours to warm other people's gods becomes an experiment in precision. You stop doing tasks that apologize for existing. You move the needle that actually moves the loom. Single-pointed, clean. The return is not just revenue, it is relief. You are no longer working to justify a self. You are working to deliver a signature. The field recognizes the signature and amplifies it. Offer is met by demand. The way phase-matched waves build a taller crest from the same water. You close the day the way you opened it. A conductor holding silence. 3 slow exhales. A brief inventory: what rang true, what rang false, what wishes to be tuned by 1 degree tomorrow. No punishment, no pageantry, just the steady privilege of calibration. You sleep, not as escape, but as collaboration. Glymphatic rivers rinsing the brain, synapses pruning, dreams editing the raw footage of experience into a cut you can carry. Morning will come, and with it, the next measure. You will take it, and the orchestra will answer, and reality will keep arranging itself around the tone you refuse to abandon. You begin to witness how a single honest oscillation triggers a cascade, not as spectacle, but as quiet inevitability. The field answers coherence with logistics. The unremarkable phone buzz you might have ignored arrives exactly when your posture lengthens. The email you postponed for weeks writes itself after 1 slow exhale. The long-avoided conversation schedules cleanly when you stop auditioning fear for the lead role. This is not luck performing a costume change. This is phase alignment, discovering enough surface area to propagate. You feel it as a rearrangement of vectors around your spine. The smallest act putting a glass back with care, naming the precise boundary without apology, aligning the hinge of a door seems meaningless until you realize you are teaching the world where your axis resides. The universe is not impressed by declarations, it is convinced by repetition. When you repeat a clean signal, everything with slack in its rope tightens to match you. Everything that cannot match you stops asking you to carry it. Rescue fantasies dissolve, integrity takes their place. You've been told that big changes require drama. You begin to suspect they require accuracy. 1,000 tiny, honest corrections are a tidal force. They turn ships. They also turn eras. You notice the way your mind tries to requisition fireworks every time progress is made, ego's old procurement department shopping for applause. You smile and let the budget expire. You are building a cathedral with quiet stones. Sound returns to the room as resonance rather than noise. Your biology cooperates. The inflammatory hum that once underwrote your mornings recedes as you stop prosecuting your sensations like hostile witnesses. Breath distributes. Peripheral vision pauses long enough to inform you that no predators are present. Cortisol relinquishes its throne to a steadier chemistry. You stop mistaking adrenaline for aliveness. The glow that replaces it is less cinematic and more reliable, like a hearth's steady heat after the bonfire's last spark has floated into cold air. You become the environment your nervous system once begged for. The psyche follows. Parts of you once dismissed, as saboteurs reveal their original assignments. The perfectionist was the archivist of precision. You restore it to curation rather than punishment. The skeptic was the sentinel of truth. You assign it to test claims rather than to assassinate beginnings. The protector was a child guarding a door with a broomstick. You thank them, hand them a real key, and let them sleep. None of these parts required exile. They required a conductor. And time, this strange fabric you wore like a verdict, loosens around your ribs. You don't add hours. You reduce friction. The ratio of effort to result improves because you stop arguing with vectors. Work folds around your capacities rather than your compensations. You pick tasks that sing in your hands, and the ones that used to drain you either simplify or vanish. Complexity is not the enemy, misalignment is. Once the main frequency is non-negotiable, complexity organizes itself like planets around a star. Relationships clarify as if someone cleaned a lens you forgot you had. You stop misreading plea for intimacy. You stop auditioning to be chosen in rooms where your presence already answers the question. You speak the unembroidered sentence and survive the quiet after it. Silence, you discover, is not a threat. It is the field listening for your actual name. Some people step closer, surprised and relieved to find a tempo they can trust. Others drift with dignity. You let the tide move. Love increases when control leaves the premises. Money, too, stops impersonating a god and returns to its correct role as a measurement of alignment over time. You stop treating revenue as absolution and start treating it as a waveform. You do the work that moves naturally from your signature, and in that narrow beam, generosity of market and meaning overlap. Optimization remains, but the optimization serves the orchestra rather than replacing it. You become expensive to distract and inexpensive to satisfy. A small set of non-negotiables delivered daily, flawlessly. Synchronicity accelerates until the word feels imprecise. It is not meaningful coincidence. It is a system maintaining coherence with minimal energy cost. The stranger you meet speaks the sentence you wrote in your journal last night. The book you need happens to be open to the page that names your situation for what it is. A traffic delay redirects you toward a doorway you had decided not to knock on. If you told this as a miracle, it would sell. If you tell it as physics, you can repeat it. Repeatable is the goal. Repeatable builds worlds. There is a temptation to celebrate too early, to declare the loop defeated, to crown a new identity and harden again around it. You refuse that seduction. Identity is a tool, not a temple. You wear it until it binds and then set it down. The self that selected coherence yesterday is not your ceiling, it is a stepping stone. You do not worship the stone, you use it to cross the river. At night, you keep the same appointment with quiet, not to perform holiness, but to honor the contract you re-signed with real. You inventory without prosecution. Where did I match my tone? Where did I deviate? What belongs to tomorrow's single-degree turn? The answers arrive without theatrics. You rest as if resting were productive, because for a coherent system, it is. Glymphatic tides sweep, dreams stitch, the loom resets tension on its threads. Morning returns, and you rise not inspired, not heroic, not perfect, simply aligned. The world notices, it always does, it cannot do otherwise. Coherence propagates. So you take your place at the instrument that is your day, lift your hands, and let the first note ring so true that the rest of the song has no choice but to arrange itself around you. You are ready to select, not as a wish but as a measurement that holds. Selection is not a sentence you say to the air. It is a geometry you stabilize until probability concedes. So you build a protocol simple enough to repeat and precise enough to move timelines. 4 gates, 1 signal, minimal loss. First, stillness. Not elaborate, not theatrical, 30 ungarnished seconds where you let the breath lengthen and the eyes soften to panoramic. Peripheral vision tells the animal there is no pursuit. The animal stops driving the bus. Vagal tone rises. The heart becomes a conductor again. Your cortex refuses the old habit of solving before sensing. This is not delay. This is calibration. You cannot land a plane on a runway that is still being paved by panic. Second, honesty. You ask the question beneath the question. What do I actually want that I am willing to be responsible for when it arrives? Desire without responsibility is entertainment. You are not entertaining yourself. You are engineering. You say the sentence simply, shorn of theater and plea. You listen for any residue of counterfeit words borrowed for applause, motives smuggled in under spiritual costume, and you extract them without prosecution. Honesty drops impedance, the field hears cleanly. Third, specificity. You select a vector, not a hallucination. Vague wants scatter the beam, precise wants focus it. Precision doesn't mean micromanaging the choreography. It means naming the invariant qualities the outcome must preserve to remain coherent. Work that uses my signature daily. Relationships that do not require my dysregulation for belonging. Revenue that scales with integrity. These are constraints that guide the search through state space. The quantum responds to constraints as invitations. Possibility prunes itself into paths. Fourth, generosity, not performative charity, generosity of reference. You select an outcome that improves the coherence of the system, not just the comfort of the self. Outcomes that starve the ecosystem cost more to maintain than they bring. You choose a future that makes you truer and makes the room truer. Systems sense this. Doors that were once polite close slowly for others. They open quietly for you. You hold these gates in place and begin the single measurement that matters, the non-reactive imagining of the already selected state. Not pretending, not escaping, you let the body feel the kinematics of life lived from that coordinate, the breath that accompanies it, the postural micro-adjustments it demands, the conversations it simplifies. You watch for physiological disagreement, jaw tensing, gut bracing, a secret flinch, and you treat those as lagging indicators, not vetoes. You do not bully your biology, you update it. Slow exhale, longer pause. Tell the muscles the news with ritual amounts of warmth. Then you anchor the state with one irreversible micro-action that contradicts the previous timeline. Send the email with the sentence you've avoided. Decline the invitation that requires you to counterfeit your tone. Publish the offer that made you rehearse for a month instead of a morning. The action is small and decisive. It collapses wave into a new eigenstate because you put skin in. The field respects collateral. So does your nervous system. Your body stops treating the selection as imagination and begins myelinating it as normal. For the next 72 hours, you run a gentle embargo on sabotage. You refuse to poll the committee. You decline the urge to test the selection by measuring hourly for proof. You do not take a vote on whether it is working. You behave as if reality were already rearranging itself around the frequency you set, because that is exactly what a coherent system does under conservation laws. You choose maintenance over fireworks. You choose craft over craving. You keep your language on a short leash. You do not narrate while gestating. You let results announce themselves by behavior. You take meetings from the state you selected, not as auditions to earn it. You spend money from the rhythm you chose, not from the panic you retired. You rest because the architecture requires cured concrete, not because you're tired of building. This is professional magic, boring to watch, impossible to stop. Obstacles arrive, as they always do, not to punish you, but to test the tensile strength of the new pattern. You don't make them villains, you use them like weight on a bar. Friction proves alignment. If the state collapses under trivial force, you do not declare failure. You re-enter stillness and increase honesty by 1 degree. The loop used to call this backsliding. The field calls it tuning. You keep the metronome audible until your hands remember. You notice the world starting to behave like a room that trusts you. The email answers itself. The call returns. The collaborator who was too busy suddenly has the hour. The problem that looked like granite shows its hinge. You do not scream miracle into the rafters. You record the parameters: posture, breath, language, micro, action, embargo. You make selection repeatable. Repeatable beats drama. Repeatable becomes culture. At night, you close the protocol with a thank you that isn't a campaign, simply acknowledgement. The field does not need praise. You need accuracy. You name what moved. You name what held. You name where fear tried to barter, and you didn't sell. Then you breathe like a cathedral in the dark, slow, sure, unhurried, and you sleep inside the world, rearranging, stone by silent stone, around the frequency you now refuse to counterfeit. You discover that the field is generous when you are alone, and exacting when you are entangled. Solitude proved the signal, relationship proves the architecture. The world is not trying to knock you off center. It is auditioning your coherence to see which structures can be trusted to hang from it. Stress arrives like weather over open water pressure fronts of deadlines, heat waves of opinion, sudden crosswinds of grief, and your task is no longer to avoid weather, but to sail with a keel deep enough to cut through it without capsizing your reference. Load reveals noise floor. Under no weight, every system sounds clean. Under weight, hidden rattles announce where bolts need torque. You begin to listen for these rattles without dramatizing them. The email that tightens your throat, the glance that makes your scapulae creep toward your ears, the calendar hour that arrives like a headwind, none of these are failures. They are diagnostic beacons. You mark them. You breathe once before moving. You apply the protocol you built, now at operational tempo. Stillness, honesty, specificity, generosity, compressed into seconds, executed without theater. You add a fifth element that only load can teach: recovery latency. How long does it take to return to your carrier wave after displacement? That metric becomes your realism. You stop judging yourself for being moved and start measuring how quickly you resynchronize. This is coherence as sport, not as performance art. Your nervous system learns interval training, not for spectacle, but for resilience. Short surges of intensity, bracketed by deliberate downshifts that teach the body to metabolize adrenaline without needing drama to justify it. Boundaries mature from slogans into physics. A boundary is not a wall, it is an impedance match. You don't harden to repel, you tune to reduce reflection. Where frequencies cannot couple cleanly, you minimize contact time and interface area without accusation. Where they can couple, you allow energy exchange with gratitude. You stop calling this being nice or being ruthless. You start calling it maintaining signal integrity. People feel the absence of accusation. Rooms relax around you even when you say no. You learn the difference between interference and instruction. Interference scrambles your reference without adding fidelity. Instruction adds complexity you can integrate. The distinction is not ideological, it is somatic. Interference produces static in the jaw and speed in the eyes. Instruction produces depth in the breath and weight in the feet. When interference arrives, you reduce gain fewer inputs, slower pace, narrower aperture until the carrier emerges again. When instruction arrives, you widen and let the richer harmony in, even if it asks you to play chords your hands have never made. Discernment is not a personality trait, it is a practiced sensation. The science here remains simple beneath the myth. Decoherence occurs when the system measures itself against incompatible environments. You reduce unnecessary measurement. You stop asking every room to tell you who you are. You stop using others' urgency as your metronome. You grant their storms the dignity of being weather, not doctrine. When a claim enters your field, you don't rush to contradict it or collapse into it. You run it through the gates. Is it true now? Is it mine to move? Does moving it preserve coherence for the larger system? If the answer is no, you let the wave pass without building a house under it. Work scales under load because you adopt queues instead of swarms. You stack tasks in single file according to one invariant. Which action yields the greatest coherence gain per unit of energy? You stop glorifying busyness as a proxy for worth. You pick the lever that moves the loom. Then you pull it fully. One lever moved cleanly beats 5 jiggled in panic. The market treats this like competence. Your body treats it like mercy. Communication becomes a low-loss channel. You speak in packets, small, complete, checksummed by breath. You say what is essential, in the order that reduces ambiguity, and you watch how clarity liberates everyone's wattage. Meetings shrink, projects move. Apologies are simpler because you are not apologizing for existing, you are repairing a mismatch. Praise becomes precise because you are not currying favor, you are reinforcing fidelity. Language stops being theater and becomes engineering. You upgrade your rest, the way an athlete upgrades sleep before a final. Darkness deepens, screens withdraw. You ritualize nothing fancy, only the reliable cues your circadian machinery respects. Cooler air, dimmer light, a timed descent in stimulation that tells the archaic brain it can hand the keys to processes older than worry. You wake without dramatic vows. You wake like a compass laid on a quiet table, needle settling on its single job. Under load, old narratives attempt to coup. This is who you always become, under pressure. You answer without argument. That was one solution with different priors. Priors change, models update. You are not erasing history, you are retraining likelihood. Bayesian engines love good data. You give them good data moments where you return to baseline faster than yesterday. Decisions where you paid short-term discomfort to purchase long-term symmetry. Hours where you refused cheap intensity and built clean amplitude instead. Community emerges not as dependence but as distributed coherence. You find the few who keep their own metronomes audible and, without ceremony, you synchronize for work that requires chorus. No one auditions trauma for leadership. No one confuses mystery with vagueness. You make things. You deliver them. The world, hungry for rooms that do not leak, routes opportunity to your door because systems prefer nodes that don't drop packets when traffic spikes. You do not ask for smaller storms. You refine your sail. You deepen your keel. You memorize the feel of true north, not as an idea but as a posture. Load increases. You lengthen your breath by one count and reduce your sentences by one clause. The field takes its measurement. You hold. Reality adjusts its rigging to your steadiness and, with an almost impersonal grace, rearranges itself once more around the frequency you refuse to counterfeit. You begin to handle identity the way a luthier handles wood, not as a slogan to wear, but as an instrument to tune, to sand, to string, to listen across seasons of humidity and strain. The old loop treated identity like a museum plaque, fixed, explanatory, inert. You retire the plaque and build a violin, a living object, a resonator, an interface between intention and sound. The fibers that once held your history rigid are steamed, curved, and glued into a body that can sing when the bow asks and go silent when the room needs its hush. This is not reinvention by costume, it is reconfiguration by acoustics. You test the timbre by striking your name against reality and listening for sympathetic vibration. Some labels produce dead rooms consuming energy without returning overtones. Others ring and keep ringing, adding harmonics to the simplest notes of your day. You are not hunting for a mystical title. You are measuring, does this configuration increase coherence for the whole system, your body, your work, your kin, your habitat, or does it demand subsidy? Subsidized identities collapse under ordinary weather. Sovereign ones hold at concert pitch. You study how the psyche organized around survival myths and how those stories hardened into chassis. I am the one who fixes. I am the one who atones. I am the one who earns permission by excellence. These chassis carried you across unpaved ground. They rattled, but they held. Gratitude is due. Then the terrain changed and the suspension damaged the cargo. You do not burn the vehicle in contempt. You salvage parts, upgrade the frame, and retire the rest with ceremony, precision without cruelty. Neuroscience lends its plain language to your right. Predictive coding says, the brain reduces surprise by guessing then checking. Identity was the global prior that biased every guess. When the prior changes, perception follows. Not instantly, by error correction. You expose yourself to better errors, conversations that ask you to be truer rather than larger. Projects that stretch skill without insulting soul, intimacy that refuses counterfeit and makes no theater from your honesty. The anterior cingulate, that sentinel of conflict detection, stops screaming at the sight of novelty and starts purring when reality contradicts your outdated maps. This is the sound of priors updating. It is the sound of freedom entering the cortex. You practice a three-step craft for identity maintenance: distill, delimit, deliver. Distill the invariant, the one or two values that stay true across jobs, cities, lifetimes. Clarity, candor, care, or courage, craft, communion. You choose with the sobriety of someone tuning scaffolding over open space. Then you delimit what you are not by contempt, but by impedance. You are not the emergency generator for every lost grid. You are not the echo of the loudest room. You are not the story that keeps you employable at the cost of accuracy. Delimitation is kindness. It prevents false contracts. Finally, you deliver. Daily, in tiny, non-theatrical ways that myelinate the configuration until the nervous system no longer negotiates with the old chassis out of nostalgia. You give the instrument a future to couple with, not a fantasy, an attractor. You compose a 5-sentence charter written from a point 2 years ahead, factual in tone, devoid of salesmanship. The cadence of your days, the quality of your work, the health of your body, the condition of your money, the ecology of your relationships. You read it slowly enough that your breath can keep up, quickly enough that your doubts cannot hijack the cadence. You do not publish it. You practice it the way a musician practices scales until muscle remembers and mind stops arguing with sound. Entanglement with that future is not superstition. It is scaffolding. You create correlated measurements between here and there, ritualized behaviors that collapse distance into rhythm. Every morning, the same cup, the same 3 lines written by hand, the same posture before the first decision. Every week, the same audit. Where did I leak? Where did I lock? What is the smallest repair with the highest fidelity return? These small correlations build a bell pair across time. Choose from here and there responds. Not magic, constraint satisfaction across scales. You address the most stubborn artifact of the loop, the need to be seen to exist. Performative identity is a bandwidth thief. You reclaim the wattage by building private excellence work no one will witness. Integrity checks no one will score. Rehearsals that never debut. The instrument grows rich when it is played for its own resonance, and rooms recognize the tone of those who are not begging for confirmation. Opportunities arrive that require the very privacy that built them. You accept without fanfare and deliver without autobiography. Conflict stops being a referendum on your existence and becomes attention to tune. 2 strings can beat against each other in dissonance or lock into a third note that neither could make alone. You move through disagreement, listening for the emergent note. If it does not appear, you do not force a duet. If it does, you hold the bow steady longer than your pride prefers. Pride loves applause. Mastery loves tone. You pick tone. The body signs the new charter in tissue. You feel it in the tongue resting quietly on the palate instead of bracing against the teeth, in the pelvic floor that no longer clenches for permission, in the thoracic spine that widens when you name a fact without embroidery. These are not aesthetics, they are design specs for a resonator with less internal friction. A body like this spends what it has on the song rather than the noise. You notice the world respond with a kind of unemotional generosity. People stop auditioning you for roles you no longer fit. They bring you problems that match your instrument. They stop asking for 5 minutes of your time and start offering 50 minutes of clean context. The ecosystem spares you the suffering of pretending. In return, you spare it the cost of your pretense. At night, you hang the instrument on its stand with the tenderness of a craftsperson who knows wood moves with weather. You humidify, you check the pegs, you clean the resin dust. You do not fear a day's detuning. You expect it. Tomorrow you will tune again. Tomorrow you will play again. And the field, exacting and generous, will furnish an audience or a silence as needed, arranging itself once more around the frequency you are now brave enough to call by its rightful name. You start to feel timelines not as roads to choose between, but as threads crossing a single loom, each carrying a color of consequence, each under tension, each waiting for the shuttle of your attention to set the next pass. Choice is not a coin tossed at a fork. It is a pattern you agree to continue or retire. The old loop wove by compulsion, repeating the same motif until the cloth frayed. You now weave by consent. You touch a thread, it hums. You listen for harmony, not volume. The quiet strand often carries the richest dye. Bifurcation points announce themselves without fanfare. An email phrased with a subtle pressure, a project whose profits arrive attached to a slow leak. A conversation where flattery hides a small demand for self-betrayal. You used to negotiate in those moments, trading shards of accuracy for speed or belonging. The tapestry paid, now you pause and place your fingers on the warp, the non-negotiables stretched between past and future, and you decide if the weft trying to pass through preserves symmetry. If it does, you let it run. If it does not, you remove it gently, even if it glitters. Physics has its own poetry for this. Path integrals, histories interfering, amplitudes adding and cancelling until one course of events gains constructive strength. Each micro-choice is an amplitude assignment. You give weight to the paths that keep you whole. Decoherence diminishes for the pattern you are willing to inhabit. What looked like destiny is revealed as diligence applied in small, honest units over time. Fate becomes a synonym for fidelity. You notice how entanglement changes in this light. Entanglement is not fusion, it is correlation. Two systems can share information without losing themselves, provided the correlation serves the larger design. You once called this chemistry and threw yourself into bonfires that looked like suns. Now you track the conservation laws. Does my clarity remain intact in this field? Do my rhythms survive contact? Does our paired measurement increase signal for both? If yes, the threads cross, and a motif emerges that neither could have authored alone. If no, you release before you scorch. Love is not the sacrifice of tone. It is the multiplication of tone across beings. Work receives the same scrutiny. You treat projects as textiles with pattern, weight, and edge. Some are silk fine, luminous, demanding perfect tension. Some are canvas sturdy, forgiving, built for weather. Some are lace, intricate, airy, meaningful when seen against a background of generosity. You stop forcing silk into tents and canvas into veils. You place each labor where it belongs and accept that not everything belongs to you, even if you can do it. Competence is not consent. The market learns your pattern language and sends commissions that match your loom. You begin to sense the ethics of beauty under the mathematics. Beauty is not decoration. It is evidence of coherence made visible. A clean spreadsheet is beautiful. A boundary stated without ornament is beautiful. A contract that prevents future resentment is beautiful. Beauty reduces entropy in human systems by removing gratuitous friction. You stop apologizing for insisting on it. Rooms relax around beauty. Timelines cooperate with it. Beauty is not a luxury for later. It is a load-bearing beam. There is a humility to the loom that the old hero narratives never understood. You cannot see the whole tapestry from your seat. You can only feel tension, listen for tone, and keep your passes true. Some days you add color no one will notice for months. Some days you repair a snag only you can feel. Some days you cut a section you loved because it misled the eye. Vanity calls this thankless. Mastery calls it necessary. The field rewards necessity with longevity. You establish a cadence for revision that prevents panic from driving the shears. Weekly, a small review, where the pattern drifted, where color pooled, where the edge curled. Quarterly, a deeper audit. Do the motifs still serve? Has the center held? Is the cloth bearing the weight we're asking it to bear? Annually, a ceremony. Retire one pattern with thanks. Invite one new pattern with care. Confirm the warp is still anchored to what you vowed at the beginning. Ritual is not superstition. It is scheduled accuracy. Your body translates all of this into gestures so ordinary they could be mistaken for nothing. You place your cup down without thudding the table. You answer an invitation with a sentence that neither flatters nor fights. You send funds before the reminder. You arrive with 5 minutes of breathing already in your spine. These micro-acts are shuttles. They pass through daily life, drawing a continuous line of trust that strangers can feel without learning your biography. The world, pragmatic as ever, responds by routing richer threads. Your way problems worth solving, companions worth keeping, responsibilities that fit your hands. You do not get everything you want. You get what you maintain. Gifts that arrive beyond your current weave are stored, not flaunted, until your loom can carry them without distorting. This restraint is not denial. It is stewardship. You are building a fabric meant to last storms you cannot predict, to clothe futures you will not personally inhabit. Night comes, and with it, the old temptation to count outcomes as proof. You keep your agreements with the craft instead. 3 breaths, 1 line of truth, a hand over the sternum feeling whether the day's pattern tugged out of square. If so, you mark tomorrow's correction. If not, you sleep inside the sound of threads cooling, tension equalizing, the loom settling into silence that is not empty but full of unspent music. Somewhere beyond language, you can feel the next motif gathering, its color already chosen by the frequency you refuse, even now, to counterfeit. Convergence arrives without trumpets. It looks like a calendar dense with meaningful hours, a queue of decisions that all rhyme, a corridor where your footsteps sound taller than they used to. Rearrangement has matured into architecture. The field has measured you enough times to treat your frequency as dependable, and dependable frequencies become infrastructure. Rooms plan around you, systems root load through you. This is not fame. This is conductivity. You feel the threshold in the way strangers speak as if they have waited for you without knowing your name. Invitations land already tuned to your cadence. Agreements clear. Deliverables sane. Timelines that breathe instead of hyperventilate. You used to chase with persuasive force. The chase has inverted. Attraction is not a spell. It is the relief system's experience when they sense low leak. They come closer because entropy is expensive and you are cheaper to run. The danger here is subtle. Success tempts the return of performance. Visibility tempts the return of counterfeit. The loop wants a sequel with a bigger budget. You refuse the spectacle and choose the seam. Seam is where forces meet and must be joined without bulge or tear. You work the seam between vision and logistics, between speed and accuracy, between solitude and chorus. A leader is not the loudest instrument. A leader is the joinery that does not crack when climate shifts. You design containers that preserve signal under crowd conditions. Meetings are 1-hour vessels with 7-minute segments and 1 silent minute per quarter, so cognition can finish chewing. Projects are bounded by clear edge conditions, done, defined, not ours, named, risk, listed without melodrama. Money flows along channels that match values on paper and in practice. You publish your criteria not to virtue signal, but to reduce future negotiation overhead. Transparency is a low-friction surface. It keeps hearts from blistering against rumor. Metrics stop policing worth and start tuning process. You treat numbers like acoustics RTT on a network, reverberation time in a hall. If signal arrives late, you shorten the room with baffles. Fewer intermediaries, clearer prompts, decisions closer to the data. If signal rings too long and muddies meaning, you add absorbers, tighter scopes, smaller teams, shorter docks. You are engineering resonance, not worshipping dashboards. The number becomes beautiful when it names what your bones already know. Power is the next test. Power is simply voltage multiplied by access. Voltage you've increased by coherence. Access now multiplies it. Unmanaged, the product cooks circuits. Managed, it lights cities. You build cooling systems, counsel that tells you facts without decorating them, practices that bleed heat without wasting flame, Sabbaths that slow the spin so bearings live. You let your name be smaller than your work. You let your work be smaller than your life. You let your life be large enough to house silence. Crisis will arrive not as punishment, but as audit, an outage, a betrayal, a public misread. You breathe once and decline the theater of innocence. Error is not identity, it is information with urgency. You perform the repair in 3 moves. State the fact without embroidery. Name the boundary that prevents recurrence. Make the smallest sufficient restitution. You do not mortgage tomorrow to buy applause today. You buy trust at wholesale, repeated fidelity at retail moments. Your voice evolves. Early on, authority came from the friction you survived. Now it comes from the friction you no longer require. You speak cleaner, fewer adjectives, more nouns. This is out of scope. This is ours. This is unclear. Here are 3 ways to make it clear. Rooms appreciate orders of operation disguised as kindness. You do not confuse softness with avoidant. You do not confuse hardness with strong. You choose steel wrapped in velvet, a spine that yields to truth and nothing else. The ecosystem around you begins to self-heal. People entrained by your steadiness make better measurements before they reach your desk. They bring you options, not drama, diffs, not dumps. You reward this with context and credit, which further reduces leakage. Culture is coherence multiplied by example. You stop writing values and start measuring the cost of violating them. Where cost is low, values are mythology. Where cost is real, values are physics. You choose physics. Mystery returns in a mature form, not as fog to hide in, but as horizon to steer by. You do not pretend to understand the entire tapestry. You accept assignments from beyond your map when they harmonize with your core frequency, even if they ask you to grow faster than you planned. You say yes with posture, not with panic. Posture says, we will learn on time. Panic says, we will burn to be believed. You retire the burn. You keep the heat. At day's end, You walk the corridor you built and listen, not for applause, for artifacts. Any echo where there should be absorption, any buzz where a ground wire loosened, any light pooling where a dimmer failed. You note, adjust, release. Then, standing at the gate between now and what asks to be born, you place a hand over the instrument of your chest and remember the contract: selection, stabilization, service. The gate recognizes the tone. It opens without ceremony. You step through, not larger, not louder, truer, and the world, exacting and generous, rearranges once more around the frequency you are finally willing to carry in public without flinching. You stand at the threshold you once chased as a horizon and recognize it as a room you built, thread by thread, choice by choice, breath by breath, not through spectacle, through fidelity. The field has measured you again and again and found your tone steady under both silence and thunder. That is why the doors swing now without creak or ceremony. They have learned your hand. You breathe, and the cathedral you carry answers arches of fascia, lifting, the bell of your heart striking once, clear. There is no righteousness here, no victory song, only accuracy. You are not the performance of a self. You are the instrument reality trusts to hold pitch when the hall fills. You do not need to be louder. You need to be true. You are. Look how the world rearranges around your refusal to counterfeit. Conversations shorten into clarity. Work folds along your natural vector. Money circulates like blood through a body that finally knows its own rhythm. This is not personal mythology. This is conservation. Systems reduce leak. You have become inexpensive to run. The ecosystem thanks you with coherence. You place one palm over the sternum where the quiet metronome lives and name the contract one last time: selection, stabilization, service. You select not by craving but by constraint that preserves the whole. You stabilize not by rigidity but by breath that returns faster after every crosswind. You serve not by erasing yourself but by offering your exact frequency until rooms can tune to their own. This is how prophecy travels. Not as prediction, but as permission. The loop is not your enemy. It is your old teacher dismissed with honors. It taught you repetition. You now teach it refinement. When ghosts arrive wearing the faces of habit, urgency dressed as importance, intensity dressed as truth, you greet them with a long exhale and a shorter sentence. Their contracts expire in the air. The future, relieved, steps closer. You will forget. Of course you will. Human means weather, but forgetting is shorter now, and remembering is a posture away. You return to the simple ritual that never needed incense. Widen the eyes to include the edges of the room, lengthen the out-breath, let language lose its adjectives until the noun of the moment appears. Then move it one clean degree toward coherence. That is mastery's gate, unimpressed with drama, obsessed with accuracy. Listen, the loom is still working. Timelines hum beneath your feet, threads taut, colors waiting. You do not need to see the whole tapestry to make a faithful pass. You touch the warp, your non-negotiables, and guide the shuttle of attention through. The cloth strengthens. The pattern continues. Somewhere, someone you'll never meet will wear the warmth you wove tonight. So take your place without apology. Be the joinery that does not crack. Be the frequency that refuses counterfeit. Let stillness be your signature, and courage be your carrier wave. And when the field takes its next measurement, as it always does, give it the simplest gift. A tone so steady that reality, pragmatic and generous, must once again rearrange itself around what you truly are. Breathe, step, deliver. The gate remains open, because you are the gate.